Okay, we are recording and we're getting started. It's good to be here with you. Hey everyone, good to see some of your pictures. Sarah's here with me. I feel like this is a big moment. Sorry, you're getting a bunch. She's the celebrity here. You're getting a lot of waves. Um, so I don't know about you, but I have very distinct memories of this time last year teaching this class. I remember exactly where I was. I was in I don't know what chair in our dining room that I was sitting in as it as we were going through some of these laws and halachods, getting ready for Pesach. A lot's changed in a year, and at the same time, a lot of things have not changed as much as we would have liked in the last year. And so we find ourselves in the second, at least in my estimation, the second uh, Pesach pandemic or pandemic Pesach of our lives. See, someone else is joining us. And so with that, I'd like to do a, a quick review of the halachods around preparing and kashering for Pesach. I'll just go over all the things that I've sent out in the last few weeks, or in the last week in particular, to make sure that everyone has seen it. Clarify a few questions that have been asked beforehand, and then hopefully we'll have a lot of time for Q&A, for questions and answers around Pesach prep. I've been able to answer some questions. I've been collecting others from members over the last week or so. And after I've gone through some of the greatest hits of questions that I've gotten so far this year, I'll open it up for anyone else who wants to ask their questions in case anything was not clear up to this point. Sorry, I'm going to need to be able to access my screen and my. Okay. Would you mind going down? Thank you. All right. So I'm sharing my screen. We're going to get started right away. I want to thank Rav Shua, who's been inspiring to up my Zoom game. It always helps to have a younger sidekick to help you get better at these things. I want to try to see as many of you as possible on my screen. You should be able to see the Zoom screen here next to me. Are you able to see a PowerPoint presentation? Or okay, so let's do this. Laws of prepping and kashering for Pesach, pandemic edition round 2. Never thought we'd see this moment, but here we are. Thank God. So when getting ready, this is a Dvar Torah that I heard a few years ago and have found it to be really resonant ever since. That the Pesach Haggadah quotes the evil child as saying, "Maha avodah hazot lachem." What is all this work for you? I'm not using the translation that's offered to you here. It says, "Ma avodah." What is all of this work that you people have to do? And then we know the words of the Haggadah, lachem v'lo. The exposition is he's talking about you, he's excluding himself. And because he excluded himself, therefore that's like he was kafar b'ikar. It's like he denied an essential principle of our faith. But Rabbi Elimelech Biederman, who I know a few people in the community have been quoting as a Hasidic rabbi in Israel. I don't know where in Israel. But he points out an obvious question. How can this evil child, he or she, be saying, Ma'avodah zot lachem? What is all this work? What work is this child talking about if we're just getting to the Seder? This is the beginning of the Seder. And Rav Elimelech Biederman said that really what this child is complaining about is the overwhelming amount of work, how laborious and how slave-like the preparation for Pesach might have actually been. That's what the Russia is saying, the evil child is saying. So obviously, we want to be in a place where we can appreciate mitzvot and have a positive relationship to them. But we also want to make sure that it doesn't seem like slave labor by the time we get to the Pesach Seder. We want to get to the goal is to get to the Pesach Seder excited for Pesach, not angry and upset about how difficult the process was to get there. I think that's always a good framework as we get started. So I'd like to just go over a very quick review about high level. What are our goals for the next 2 weeks? What are we trying to get? What are we trying to accomplish between now and Pesach? So there are really 4 mitzvot that we're trying to prepare for. The first is that there's a prohibition, an isur d'oraisa, a biblical prohibition against possessing and owning chametz on Pesach. You don't want to have any association with chametz that is in your possession. So that's number 1. Number 2 is there's a mitzvah aseh, there's a positive commandment of biur, of tashchitus or mibatechem, of removing leaven from your homes, from your properties, from any place that is in your domain, including properties that are rented to you. And so there's a positive mitzvah there as well. Debates about how to properly do this, debates about if you sell all of your property, we'll get there in a moment, are you still obligated to fulfill this mitzvah or not? Those are more details, but we know that there's an important mitzvah of biur, of getting rid of the chametz actively. There's a prohibition against eating chametz or mixtures of chametz. We'll get there later. That's a much stricter standard than some of the other mitzvot in this grouping. And then finally, there's an isur, a biblical prohibition about benefiting from a chametz as well. So that might involve making money off of the sale of chametz on Pesach, if a person owns a restaurant, etc. Those are things that come up. So that's the high level priority of what we're trying to accomplish between now. We're now in the second day of Nisan, between now and the 14th of Nisan, just under 2 weeks. Okay, so we have three mechanisms for how to accomplish these goals. Right? The first is search and destroy. Right? That's the idea of bedikat chametz, searching for chametz, and then whatever you find, doing biur, destroying it actively. The second is bitul, is a verbal annulment of chametz. And the third, you might call this a modern approach because it was really not practiced until the late medieval period and really only became more popular even since then, is mechirat chametz, the sale of chametz. Those are three mechanisms to avoid transgressing the prohibitions of owning chametz on Pesach, to fulfill the positive mitzvah, bedika and biur, checking and destroying. There's the mitzvah to actively rid the chametz from our domain. And to not have ownership of it as well, and not risk eating it. Those are mechanisms. Let me go into kind of some just very brief source material, and I'm running through this quickly because I think it's important, but at the same time, I want to save time for the other important things we have to do as well. So the source in the Talmud here points out, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, quoting Rav, that once a person has done bedika, has checked their chametz, and the assumption is you've checked your chametz and you found all the leaven products and then you destroyed them. And so the statement is, if you've done bedika, if you've done this checking and destroying, the search and destroy, then why do you also have to make a declaration of bitul? And the Talmud's answer essentially is that you may have missed something. Essentially, what the Talmud is saying is that, biblically speaking, on a d'oraita level, you could have either fulfilled all of these mitzvot either by saying all the chametz that belongs to me is ownerless. That would have been one mechanism, or by saying finding all your chametz and destroying it. One of those would have worked biblically. The rabbis made an edict saying that we want to be strict. The prohibitions around chametz are some of the most strict prohibitions in the Torah. And so the rabbi said, we're going to make a siag or a gzera. We're going to make a fence, a rabbinic fence or edict around these biblical laws. And we're going to require people to not only say these things are annulled, but also we're going to make them destroy it. And one of them is not enough on their own on a rabbinic level. One of the things that this solves for is the suggestion that if a person has done bitul, has only just verbally annulled their chametz, said it's ownerless, but didn't actually seek it out to destroy it, what if they find like a gluska yafa, some kind of nice cake, and before they realize, oh, this isn't owned by me, they'll pick it up and they'll forget momentarily that it's Pesach, and they might transgress the prohibition of eating it in a kind of moment of folly when they forget it's Pesach. And so therefore, not only do we do bitul, we also do bedika and biur. We also get rid of our chametz as well. Just very quickly, sometimes as important as it is to think about what has to be destroyed, equally important is to think what does not have to be destroyed. And this is where we're going to start trying to make things a little bit easier for ourselves. A mentor of mine, Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg, who I think I quote every year around this time, says that in principle, you should be able to clean your homes for Pesach in one day. That's his contention. That I see some of you smiling, but in principle, you can actually get this done in one day. How so? By realizing that not everything has to be cleaned to the standard of spring cleaning, if at all. A few sources that point this out. Pat she'ivsha, that's Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law rules, that spoiled bread, or things that have been spoiled to the point where a dog would not eat them. Bandages used to be made of some kind of grain or wheat product, like a flour product. If it's no longer edible, you're not obligated to destroy things that are inedible. So that's the first thing, right? If something has become spoiled to a certain point, you're not obligated to seek and destroy it. Similarly, the Shulchan Aruch later points out, this is the second source on the page, that really there are only 5 grains that you can either fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with, or by transverse, that you can fulfill the prohibition, or that you can violate the prohibition of owning chametz. And those are wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. If you have something in your possession that has none of those ingredients in it, for example, kidney oats, right? These are legumes that Ashkenaz Jews don't eat on Pesach. Those things you cannot be liable for eating them on a biblical level. I'm not recommending the eating of kidney oat. The Ashkenaz community has taken that as a pretty strong minhag, and yet you can't be liable for eating it, and therefore you cannot be liable for owning it as well. And so in our home, we have cans of chickpeas many years that we don't open or use on Pesach, but at the same time, we're not driving ourselves crazy to burn it in the backyard with our remaining crumbs of bread. We just put it away in a place where we know we're not going to get in contact with it over Pesach. Finally, the Mishnah Berurah rules that while there's a little bit of a debate, if you have let's say large pieces of food that were chametz, that were actual chametz, as in made of the 5 grains, but are not fully edible, they're only partially spoiled. If it's less than a kazait, the Mishnah Berurah, Rabbi Israel Meir Kagan rules, if it's less than a kazait, which is less than an olive's volumetric amount, then you're not even obligated to destroy it. So practically this means that there are lots of things you don't have to destroy at all. You don't have to get rid of, you don't have to worry about. Right? Makeup, there are different standards about this, but this is our communal practice. Makeup, unless if you're planning on ingesting lipstick on Pesach, you're not obligated to get rid of lipstick, makeup, other forms of makeup as well. Toiletries, the same thing is true, right? If you have a soap that says that it's made with I don't know, I've seen like oat soaps or other such things. You're not obligated to get rid of oat soap unless if it's either fully edible or partially edible and more than a kazait. I've never seen a human being put soap in their mouths. The Talmudic standard is about whether a dog would eat it. I've never seen a dog try to eat soap, even when made of food substances. So I think generally speaking, you don't have to worry about toiletries. Medicine as well. Any medicine that is ingestible in pill form, you don't have to worry about it. Even vitamins as well. I think Rav Moshe Feinstein was lenient about pill vitamins. Vitamins that have flavors and are meant to be swallowed and to taste good along the way, that's a little bit more complicated. It really would be best to try to find kosher for Passover vitamins if they're meant to be edible, if they're meant to be eaten with flavors to make them taste better. As I mentioned before, if you have canned goods or other things in your pantry that have no chametz in it, have no grain in it, etc., like canned corn, tomato sauce, others, tomato paste. You can think of lots of examples in your own pantry. Those things you don't need to destroy them. Just find a place, put them away so you're not going to come in contact. Put them in like one shelf in your kitchen or one part of your pantry. Tape it off so you remember not to eat it on Pesach, and just leave it there, and you're done. You should keep it separate from Pesach food, but there's no need or obligation to sell or to destroy it, etc. Okay, so now that we've said what doesn't have to be checked or destroyed, what things do need to be checked or destroyed? I don't have my watch, so I'm going to keep looking at my phone to make sure I know what time it is. So Rabbi Goldberg, who I learned this approach from, the laws I knew, but he has a very easy approach for how to think of this, so you should really divide your home or your property into 3 spaces. There are the places that a person never brings food, period. Those places you do not have to check, period. Right? If you happen to be the kind of person who has a garage and never puts anything in your garage, never leaves any food in your garage, you don't use it as a pantry, you do not need to check your garage for chametz. Just leave it alone. Then there are places that, by the way, fortunately, the blessing in our lives is that we don't bring food into the garage, but our kids bring food everywhere. Makes it a little bit harder for people with the toddler stage at home. You can't rely on some of these leniencies, but hopefully for some of you, these leniencies do apply more broadly. Okay, then the second part or type of space is places where you might occasionally bring food. So for me, I would guess this might be your Not, we're not talking about your kitchen or your dining room, but maybe we're talking about a couch that you like to read at. So sometimes you'll bring tea there, but on occasion you might bring a few cookies as well. Right? They're not places you eat regularly. That in those kinds of places, if this is a living room space or a backyard space, a cursory, actually, let's leave it at the backyard. A cursory check is enough. What that basically means is you look at the surfaces in the room. You try to quickly check, is there chametz here or is there not? Essentially, this is what we do on the night before Pesach most years when we go around with our candle and we're doing our kind of ritualistic bdika or ritualistic checking. It's a cursory check, and that's what you do in places where you don't normally bring food, but only bring food on occasion. Again, if you have kids who like to eat on your couches, even when you ask them not to, and tell them a million times that that couch is not a place for eating, but they do it anyways, then you probably need to check a little more carefully. Lift up the pillows, make sure that there's nothing stuck, that there are no Cheerios stuck between the cushions. Try to do a bit better of a job if you have kids eating there. Um, and then there are the places that a person eats often and regularly. So those are the places that have to be checked the most carefully. I think for most people, this is either their kitchen or their dining room or both. And those places, you need to really do a careful check on all the surfaces in which you normally eat and which you plan on eating on Pesach or you plan on preparing food on Pesach. Those places have to be checked really carefully. But if you think about it, for most people, that's probably a third or less of their home that has to really be checked carefully. The majority of one's house, a cursory check is enough if required at all. Um, One thing when you're thinking about these places is that if you're not going to use that place on Pesach, such that there's no risk that you're going to go look around and try to and accidentally find a nice cake, what I referred to in the Talmud before, a glus kayafa. If you're not going to use that place on Pesach, you can just tape that space off, assuming that you don't eat there regularly during the year, and so it's not likely that you're going to find a nice amount of chametz there. You can just say, I'm cordoning this off for Pesach, and you don't have to check it at all. Similarly, if you have appliances that you're not going to use for Pesach, I think the best example of this is a toaster. If you have a toaster, but without a doubt, right, a toaster is going to have lots of crumbs of chametz in it. However, if you're not using that toaster on Pesach, and I personally strongly recommend against using toasters on Pesach, I think they're almost virtually impossible to clean. Um, then I would just recommend put it in a place where you won't be using it on Pesach, whether that's a basement or a shelf in the bottom underneath your sink that you can just tape off for Pesach. You don't have to clean it; just put it away and don't worry about it anymore. Because again, you're not risking. There's no prohibition of owning crumbs on Pesach, and if you're not going to be coming in contact with it, there's no risk that you're going to be eating the crumbs, which we'll talk about as a higher concern. Okay. So I mentioned that before. Appliances that you're not going to use on Pesach, just put them away in a box or in a cabinet. Close off the cabinet. Ignore it for the rest of for all of Pesach, and you're done. If you have shelves or closets that you're not going to use on Pesach, again, just tape them off. Leave them alone. Uh, a few rules of thumb. If you want to really fulfill the mitzvot of preparing for Pesach, not the spring cleaning that often comes around with them, um, you don't have to empty or wipe off all of your cabinets or dressers. I know in Hasidic communities, there's this practice of people taking every book off their bookshelf and shaking them out. There's no obligation to do that to fulfill the mitzvot. If you want to be amazingly stringent, I guess it's your right to do so. I'm not going to be shaking out all of my books for Pesach. Um, you don't have to wipe down all the cabinets that you don't plan on using for Pesach. You don't have to wipe out your dressers where you keep your clothes. There should be no toothbrushes or sponges used to clean the tiles on your floor. You should not need to move any heavy appliances in your kitchen. Let's say if you have a stove that in theory chametz could have gotten underneath it, there is zero chance that you will be looking for a beautiful cake underneath your stove on Pesach. And if that assumption is correct, then there's no reason to check underneath your stove for cleaning for Pesach as well. And based on that, really, there shouldn't be much reason to get onto your knees or climb onto a ladder. If it's not a surface that you're going to actually be eating off of or preparing food on, then there's no need to do anything more than a cursory check. And again, as a reminder, old dirty crumbs do not count as chametz. Okay, how am I doing so far? I've been talking for 20 minutes into a screen. Doing okay here? I'm just going to look through. Okay, I see some of your screens. Great. A few more points, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty details. This so far has all been addressing the mitzvot of not owning chametz, right? The prohibition against owning chametz, and the obligation to rid yourself of chametz. Right? That we've not been talking about the prohibition of eating chametz. The prohibition of eating chametz is a much stricter prohibition. The Shulchan Aruch rules that, and this is not just in the Shulchan Aruch, it's already in the Talmud, that while we have laws of smaller amounts being batel, being annulled in larger portions, like, for example, milk and meat, if you accidentally drop a drop of milk into a chicken soup, right, we know the rule there, the standard is batel b'shishim, that one small portion gets annulled in a portion 60 times its volume. Right? So that's normally how the laws of kashrut work, but the Shulchan Aruch clarifies and codifies that is not true when it comes to eating chametz. When it comes to the consumption, the food consumption of chametz, it is not batel, it is not annulled afilu be'elef, even in 1,000 times its volume, which is the rabbinic version of hyperbole. It basically means it's not batel at all. It does not become annulled at all. And so for chametz, for the prohibition of eating chametz, we have to be exceptionally careful. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of tonight, is how to be cautious about ingredients. What kinds of ingredients are we going to be using for Pesach? How are we going to kasher items or utensils or appliances in our kitchens that we want to use for kosher for Passover cooking? We have a principle of tam ki ikar, that taste of chametz that has been imbued in pots and pans and other kinds of dishes, the taste itself is as if you're eating the real thing. So if you've cooked hot chametz in dishes, then there really has to be a kashering process to remove that taste. And so that's a much, much stricter standard when it comes to kashering. And I would strongly recommend that you spend most of your time and effort on the kashering process rather than on the cleaning your house process. That's where the majority of your efforts should be placed. Again, small caveat for those who have small children, but even I think we're going to, probably for us, the most time is going to be cleaning out our minivan. That minivan, I don't want to think about all the things that have gotten into that. How our children find ways to stick like little Cheerios in nooks and crannies, and that's a place that we're going to be using on Pesach as well. So I'm probably going to have to spend a good 2 hours on the minivan. Probably have to spend I have a much smaller car now, so I'll have to spend a little bit less time on my car, though the kids have still managed to put stuff in there. And we'll take off the cushions to our couches. But each couch is probably not going to take more than 15 minutes with a dust buster to just try to clean it off quickly. Okay. I think you might be able to hear some of my kids in the background, who, thanks to daylight savings, are never going to go to sleep ever again. Okay. So I think that's everything that I had in the slideshow. And now I'd like to kind of move on to more direct discussions about appliances, ingredients, and the rest of the process. Before I do that, any questions about what we've covered so far in terms of the cleaning one's house for Pesach? Okay. I'm seeing a few people shaking their heads and a lot of people whose faces I can't see. So I'll assume that we're good. Please don't hesitate stopping me. This is the time to ask all our questions. The more questions you ask now, the less last-minute emails we all have to deal with in the 12th hour on Erev Pesach or Erev Pesach. Okay. I won't say one last shot or forever hold your peace. You please do still email me if you forget or you think of something else. Okay, what if your toddler gets chametz crumbs in books and sefarim? So that's a great question, and something that we live with. I would recommend, if these are things that you normally use at your Shabbat table or your kitchen table, like benchers, just don't put away your benchers for Pesach and use your Haggadahs for benching instead. And if you put away your benchers, you don't have to check them. Just put them in a box, seal them with one piece of tape, just as a reminder, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. In terms of books in your library, whether these are sefarim that you like to read on Shabbat, or I don't know, or chemistry books, or whatever the case might be, just don't bring them to your table. Don't eat. Say, I would strongly recommend for 8 days a year, say that you're not going to eat your books at your kitchen table. So if you're not eating at your if you're not reading at your kitchen table, therefore the chance of you eating any crumbs that may or may not be in those books in the first place is slim to none. However, if you really think you need to take these books to the table, then they should be, I guess at that point, they should be shaken out for crumbs beforehand. I would just recommend, it's far easier to not eat and drink right next to where you're reading your books for 8 days a week than to clean out your entire library. Does that make sense? Okay, great. That's an excellent question. Thank you. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat. Okay, I want to just walk through a few other uh, practical kind of notes or recommendations. The first is a reminder that uh, mechirat chametz is a technical fulfillment of the mitzvah not to be in ownership of leavened products. There are different opinions about how strict to be when using mechirat chametz. I think the normal custom in the modern Orthodox community is to be reasonably easygoing about it. Personally, our household, we try to wean down on chametz gomor, on full leavened products before Pesach. So we try to manage our Cheerio purchasing so that we don't have a lot of extra boxes of Cheerios before Pesach. That being said, if there are things that are a hefsid meruba or a major loss, then I think there's a strong reason. Either you can just take the approach that you're going to sell all of your chametz, but even if you want to be strict, I don't think it's worth being strict at the expense of having a major financial loss. This is a halachic mechanism. It does work. I think we should feel free to take advantage of it. So personally, my custom is that I sell I don't have the world's largest whiskey collection, but I've been fortunate we have some spirits at home. Those spirits are mostly made of grain products. We do sell our whiskey for Pesach. So that's what we're going to do. I just want to make sure that you've all seen the delegation of power of attorney. We have a new individual who's going to be buying chametz, who's agreed to buy chametz from the community this year. So I've basically taken the old form and turned it into a Google Doc. I'm going to put the link in the chat here in case you didn't see it before. And I strongly encourage that you please fill it out as soon as possible, no later than Thursday night, March 25th, which is a week from this Thursday. That would be like the latest time to fill out the chametz form. Okay, so moving on, let's talk more about kashering, because I think that's where we're probably all feeling a little more anxious. We'll talk about kashering. We'll talk about ingredients. Then I will post some helpful links, and then we'll answer questions. That's our agenda for the rest of the night. So I'm going to share my screen about our new kashering standards, and I want to clarify a few points from before. So the big difference for this year, I don't think we're in the same shat hadchak extenuating circumstances that we were at last Pesach. Last Pesach, we arrived at a lot of additional leniencies in terms of both kashering and ingredients. And I feel very fortunate that we got to go through that. Sorry, I'm not, it's hard to say that I'm grateful for anything in the last year that had to do with the pandemic, but at least one silver lining is that I got to question a lot of halachic assumptions that had been our community's practice in terms of kashering, and really just learn more about certain stringencies around kashering for Pesach. In that process, I spoke to my posek, Rav Simon from YU, who I think many of you have met when he spent Shabbat in this community. And with Rav Simon, I kind of came up with a new set of recommendations for our community's kashrut standards. The big two differences are that while in the past we were strict not to kasher glass or plastic, I think this year there is room to kasher glass or plastic, and that's going to have a lot of derivative benefits for Pesach. Just a little bit of background here. Plastic was something that's been debated. When plastic first became popularly used in kitchens, the concern was that plastic would melt quite easily. Rav Moshe Feinstein had this concern. And so Rav Moshe Feinstein said if plastic can melt easily, then his concern was people won't put it through the rigorous kashering process of putting it in boiling water out of the concern that it's not going to, that it won't survive the kashering process. This is actually similar to the reason that the rabbi said in the Talmud that we don't kosher porcelain, that we don't kosher clay cheres, that we don't kosher anything that is made of clay, basically all pottery that we don't kosher. The rabbi said you don't do it because people aren't going to do it properly out of the concern that it'll break. So that was true for plastic in the early quote unquote years of plastic in kitchens. But now that there's very strong dishwasher safe plastic, I would venture to say the majority of plastic that you might have in your kitchen is dishwasher safe. So the CRC, the Chicago Rabbinical Council, the Orthodox Union, they've been saying for years that you can kosher plastic. So we're moving in line with that Pesach, with that decision that dishwasher safe plastic can be koshered for Pesach. And then probably the bigger leniency is around kashering glass. Kashering glass is a debate between the Mechaber Rabbi Yosef Cairo in the Shulchan Aruch and Rabbi Moshe Isserles. The opinion of the Shulchan Aruch is actually that glass is such a strong material that it never takes in taste whatsoever. And so, strictly speaking, Sephardic Jews actually say that you don't ever have to kosher glass. Period. My recommendation is to kind of take a midpoint, I guess a compromise position, and to say that we should kosher our glass for Pesach, and we'll go through the ways of how to do that. But glass is in fact kosherable. This is a little bit more lenient than the general practice in the Ashkenaz community that's in line with Rabbi Moshe Isserles, who said that glass is never kosherable. So you have this kind of, actually, it's one of those rare areas where there's actually quite a large divide between Sephardic practice and Ashkenaz practice. And the Ashkenaz community, even against Rabbi Moshe Isserles, has often koshered glass during the year. I'm suggesting this year that we can kosher glass for Pesach as well. I'm fully comfortable with it. It's something that, if my Rebbe, Rav Simon, who's a serious Talmud Chacham, says that it's fine with me as well. I would say if you're having people for Pesach who have a much stricter standard in their own private lives, you might want to just make sure that they're comfortable with that as well. It's worth being considerate of others. That being said, for our community standard, I feel very comfortable recommending that from this point on, we can kosher both glass and plastic for Pesach. So with that in mind, most of these things have not changed this year from last year. Let's go through some of the appliances first of how to kosher them. So appliances, cooktops, both electric and gas, have to be cleaned really well. They should be cleaned carefully, and then the surfaces of them should be covered with aluminum foil. Ideally, two, even better would be two coverings of aluminum foil. Heavy duty is better. I'm not saying it's like, I don't think if you don't have heavy duty aluminum foil, that means you have a treif kitchen, but I think it is really better because things do tend to rip on Pesach. If you have a gas stovetop, then I would recommend, you could do one of two things. You could either take the grates, put them in an oven for a self-cleaning cycle, which gets really hot, or you could just take the grates, put big pots filled with water on top of them, and turn up each burner to the highest temperature for 15 minutes. That's having the pots there is going to spread the heat along the grates, really along any part of the surface where you will eventually be cooking for Pesach, and that will fulfill the need to kosher. And once you've done that, your grates and your stovetop are immediately koshered. Electric cooktops are similarly easy. Once they come to a glow in principle, then they are already koshered. That's based on the principle of libun gamor. The libun gamor, the high level of heating, of kosher heating, is accomplished when something glows red, and electric burners do that quite quickly. When it comes to ovens, there's really kind of two basic approaches. Most ovens, if you don't have a self-cleaning oven, what you should do is take a caustic cleaner, if you're able to do so, clean your oven really well, get rid of all grease, of all stains. That should take place. Then ideally you wait 24 hours, and then you put it up to the highest temperature possible for 1 hour. Broil is often the highest temperature that you can get to an oven. If you have a self-cleaning oven, then you don't have, it's quite a luxury in the world of kashrut. You don't have to do any cleaning because it gets to such a high temperature. I think it goes up to 950 degrees Fahrenheit, that it incinerates any possible material that's in the oven. And so not only does it clean out your oven, but it also koshers it at the same time. So that would be my recommendation. You don't have to wait 24 hours for that. You could do that immediately. I would recommend against using toaster ovens. I think it's virtually impossible to clean them to the standard where you're not getting any crumbs into your food on Pesach. So just put them away for Pesach. Broilers, you can see more information. I don't think that comes up for most people. Microwave ovens. So a difference this year because of the plastic leniency is that if the insides are made of anything other than enamel, I think you can kosher your microwaves. Enamel is a little bit more tricky. I see someone asking a question here. I see a question. What do you do if the shelves in the oven cannot go through a self-cleaning cycle? That's a great question. I'm assuming that this is a self-cleaning oven.
Yeah, it's a self-cleaning oven, but they tell you that the shelves can't survive a self-clean cycle.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So then in that case, just thinking out loud or thinking quietly while you're all waiting, the best case scenario would be that you take, you clean them, wait 24 hours, and then after self-cleaning the oven, you put them back in and put the oven to its highest temperature for about an hour. That would be the best case scenario. If that's not possible for whatever reason, then feel free to come back to me in private and we could think about some kind of extenuating circumstances approaches, but that would be the best case scenario. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that should be fine.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Great. So microwave ovens. I'm going to close the chat. So if anyone puts a question in the chat and I don't see it, please feel free to just unmute yourselves. Okay. So microwave ovens, even if even if the container on the inside, the kind of walls of the oven are made of plastic or metal, then they can be koshered. Clean it well, wait 24 hours, put a cup of water and turn on the microwave oven to the highest possible temperature. And then once the water basically creates enough steam, the principle for koshering is kabolo kulto, that the same way something becomes non-kosher, the same way that it becomes kosher. So in this case, when you're koshering, when the steam goes through and covers all the walls of the microwave oven, that is the koshering process completed. So that covers microwaves. One should ideally cover up or remove the plate, the tray on the bottom that spins around. It's harder to kosher that. And so I recommend ideally removing it, and if not possible, covering it up with something like saran wrap that's not going to explode your microwave. I do not cover it with aluminum foil because then you will have an exploding microwave. And the scientists on this call could explain why later. Okay, so sinks. We apply the general principle again for any kosherable material of kubo. Okay, so I just saw a question for koshering one's gas stovetops. What kind of pot do you put on the gas stove to kosher it? A Pesach pot or a chametz pot, or doesn't matter? I think in the process of koshering, it does not matter. When we talk about dishes later, when we talk about koshering utensils later, there is a preference. Though in that case, again, either one works if you're stuck. But in the Pesach, in the koshering of the burners, I think either one is fine as long as it's a clean pot. It should be clean. And I would recommend, just for safety purposes, having it filled with water. Okay, thanks for that question. So sinks are another case where we apply the principle of kabolo kach polto. The same way something goes in, non-kosher taste goes in, is the same way non-kosher taste comes out. And so in this case for sinks, we rely on the principle of ivrui kli rishon. Ivrui kli rishon is the idea of pouring out liquid from a primary heat vessel, from a primary source of heat. The thinking is that the hottest one's sink ever becomes in the first place. Okay, sorry, I'll just pause. For microwaves, that's a container that you're putting water in. In principle, if you're putting in a cup that hasn't been used for 24 hours, in principle, it's okay if it's not for Pesach. I'd say for a microwave, it's just easier. I'd recommend just taking a paper cup that's able to hold liquid in it and putting that into your microwave. I think it's just a little bit simpler in that case for a microwave if you have paper cups available. I know it's not great for the environment, but I think 1 cup, if the most you're using of disposable or one-time use paperware is 1 cup to kasher your microwave, that's probably the best way to do it. Okay, and I just got a recommendation. Let's try to save questions for the end. I think that makes sense. So we'll try to get through the rest of the kashering, and then I'll take questions afterwards. Thanks for that recommendation. Okay, so sinks. Kabolo kachpoto, the principle there means that given that the hottest liquid that ever touches a sink, halachically, is something that has emerged from a primary vessel. As in, a sink never creates its own heat; it only absorbs heat of something that was poured out from another utensil. Therefore, we kosher it the same way. So you should clean your sink thoroughly. I'm talking about all materials that are kasherable. So this year, I'm recommending that for metal sinks, plastic sinks. Not that I've seen so many of those, but in kitchens, but it's possible. So metal, glass, plastic can be koshered in terms of sinks. Stone sinks, though I don't really see those often, can be koshered as well. And you kosher them by cleaning them, waiting 24 hours without hot water. So I would recommend finding a way to make sure that there won't be hot water placed in the sink for 24 hours. Shabbat is often a helpful time to do that. If you want to think about doing your cleaning right before Shabbos and then you're koshering on Saturday night after Shabbat, that might be a helpful approach. Then you take a kettle, ideally a Pesach kettle. If not, you can use a regular one as long as it's clean. You boil the water immediately after having boiled it. You pour it all over your kettle. You pour it from the kettle, the boiling kettle, all over your sink. You might need a few kettles to do that, a few refills to get your whole sink. You should try to pour boiling water on the faucets and on the faucets and on the. I'm losing my words tonight. It's been a long day with the kids. The thing that the water comes out from. Feel free to unmute yourself and fill me in for my momentary lapse. Thank you, Ruth. I see
Drain, the faucet, the spigot.
Faucet. Thank you. Yes, all of the above. Try to pour water on all of those things, including the faucet. The faucet was the word that was escaping me. Thank you, Deborah. Now I'm glad. Another reason I'm glad we're not streaming this on Facebook tonight. Okay. Countertops. Again, this is going to be a little bit more lenient than in previous years. In previous years, it's a similar principle if you want to use boiling water from a kettle, or you can use a steamer that actually arrives at a boiling temperature, where the steam coming out of the steamer maintains its boiling temperature or close to it as it touches the countertops themselves. We have one of those very, very like industrial steamers that get to that temperature in the synagogue office. Deborah, maybe you and I can make sure that we have it available for people if they'd like to reserve it from the office. Thank you. I think there are 1 or 2 community members who have one as well. So I'm sure we can find a way for you to get one. So feel free to email the office or myself after if you'd like to use our steamer and take it for a few hours one day before Pesach. This year, an additional leniency is that Formica, which is a type of plastic, I'm going to suggest can be kosher for Pesach. That's different than what I've said in the past, and I've only gotten to that point after doing more research. Well, in theory, you can kosher wood tables or wood counters for Pesach. You have to be more concerned about the little nooks and crannies that can get chametz stuck in them. So generally, the practice is just to cover them. Refrigerators, wash them carefully. They're cold places. In laws of kashrut, things don't transfer without heat. If you want to cover them, great, gesundheit, it's certainly a nice thing to do, but you don't, strictly speaking, have to cover the shelves in your refrigerators as long as they're washed well with some kind of soap or some kind of detergent that in theory makes anything that was there inedible. Dishwashers, I'm following my Rabbi Rav Simon's recommendation this year that even with interior walls made of plastic, they can be kosher for Pesach. Rav Simon's the thing that you have to be careful with dishwashers, and this is one of the reasons that I think many places are strict, is that you really do have to try to clean out the filters at the bottom. And often that can actually require taking out a screwdriver and basically screwing up the filters and making sure that they're very well cleaned before Pesach. That really should be done. Assuming you can do that, then once you've done that, make sure that the dishwasher is clean, wait 24 hours, And Rav Simon's recommendation was to run 1 cycle with soap and then 3 empty cycles using only water as a way to guarantee that you've koshered your dishwasher. That's Rav Simon's recommendation. And I think that can be relied on this year and going forward, not just as a shat tzchak recommendation for last year under extenuating circumstances. Okay, so now let's talk about utensils. And by utensils, I'm talking about these are cutlery, servingware, but also dishes, pots, pans, etc. So the basic approach here is that there are certain materials that cannot be koshered, and then there are 2 forms of heat. One of them is easier to deal with than others. So in terms of materials this year, what I'm recommending, and I'm actually gonna have to change this document because I confirmed one thing with Rav Simon today that I'll need to go back to, and so we'll send out an updated version of this, God willing, later this week. When it comes to materials, the only material that really cannot be koshered are materials that are made of earthenware. So what that means, I wouldn't, even though there might be some room, I wouldn't recommend ceramic dishes to be, even if they have glass glaze, I would not recommend that as our community standard for this year. China similarly has some amount of ceramic in it. It's not just made of glass. However, things that are made purely of glass, things that are made of plastic and are dishwasher safe plastic, that's an important caveat, things that are made of metal, things that are made of wood and stone, as long as there's not a lot of holes or kind of cracks in it, in general, they can be koshered. So that's kind of what materials may be koshered. Beyond that, there are 2 types of heat in which things become non-kosher or not kosher for Pesach. And we apply the principle of Kabbalah Kach Polto, that the same way the non-kosher taste comes in is the same way it has to come out. So one form is liquid heat. Liquid heat is the type of heat where water or some other kind of liquid is the medium in which the taste transferred into the pots or into the dishes, etc. If liquid heat is the way it goes in, then liquid heat is the way it comes out through the kashering process, and that's what we call hagala. Hagala is immersion into boiling water. So when I think about hagala, I think about all of my servingware. All servingware can be kosher with hagala. That's any basically kind of metal cutlery, most kinds of metal cutlery. I think about pots that are used for chicken soup and for other kinds of sauces, things that are liquidy in nature. I'm not thinking about things that are used to bake on. Baking generally is considered dry heat. So if you have a pan that you bake cakes on or challahs on, that is not a liquid form of heat. The heat is considered a dry heat, and that anything that is a dry heat requires libun gamor. Libun gamor means an exceedingly high temperature of dry heat to kosher something. Normally, you would require something like a blowtorch to kosher those kinds of things, and in theory, in principle, it's doable. An example of this might be the grates of a barbecue. If you can take a blowtorch to a barbecue grate, you can kosher it for Pesach. That being said, I think more common is that people just don't kosher those things and try to either do without it for a week or find a replacement. But in principle, it is doable. One solution for libun gamor, if you're fortunate to have a self-cleaning oven, is that you can take those things and put them in a self-cleaning oven during the self-cleaning cycle. That would accomplish the level of heat known as libun gamor, of the high heat that's required for things that became non-kosher or not kosher for Pesach with dry heat, without liquid in them. So if you're koshering with hagala, what it basically means is you should ideally take a kosher for Pesach pot. If you don't have one easily available, take any pot that has not been used for 24 hours and is clean. You then make sure that you have the pot full with boiling water. You then, if you're trying to kosher the pot itself, you have to displace the water over the sides of the pot while it's still boiling. And so an easy way to do this, people used to do it by taking scalding rocks and dropping them into the pot. I think it's a little dangerous. Instead, I'd recommend taking a kettle that has boiling water inside. Right after it's finished boiling, you take that, you have boiling water in your pot, you have a kettle filled with boiling water, you lower the kettle into the pot itself such that it's displacing the water over the sides of the pot, and then you've koshered your pot. So that's how you kosher the biggest pot in your kitchen. Once you've done that, you can take all the little pots in your kitchen and kosher them in the big pot. Or you can just start with a not kosher for Passover pot if you don't have one easily available that is kosher for Passover. as long as it has not been used in 24 hours and is fully clean. So with that, you then start dropping in your utensils or the things that you're trying to kosher. When it comes to serveware, what you can really do is just drop one at a time. The goal is that every part of that serveware of whatever you're dropping and koshering has to fully touch boiling water at one point. So it doesn't all have to touch boiling water all at once, but it all has to come in contact with that boiling water in order to kosher it. So if you have something big that can't fully fit in your pot, what you could do is like dip 2/3 of it from one side in first, remove it, flip it around, and then dip the other third or the other half in, as long as you've had the full thing get in contact with the water. There's a minhag, a custom, once you're done with your koshering, to put it all in cold water after. It's a tradition. It's good to do. Don't worry about it if you're stuck. Okay, one thing that I'm also going to have to clarify, there are two things that I want to clarify, and I'll send out a revised document. I know the hour is getting late. The first is about silverware that has two parts. I spoke to Rav Simon, to my Rebbe, about it today, and what he felt is if you have, let's say, a knife where the handle is very well attached to the metal of the knife itself, as in there's not really much room for chametz to get stuck there, then you can kosher that kind of knife for Pesach. Just clean it really, really well, ideally with some kind of non-edible cleaning agent. That could be soap. And then you wait 24 hours, you put it in your boiling water, and you're fine. The cases where you should be worried about things with cracks, so this is a little bit more lenient than what I've suggested in previous years after talking to Rav Simon. I have a few knives. I think they're more like decorative knives, where the handle is loosely connected to the actual knife itself. And there really is risk of like chametz getting stuck in there or getting trapped, and it's not easy to clean. I think in those cases, I would be a little bit more careful. But if you have utensils where the handle is not is a separate material, even if it's made of plastic, but is really well attached and there's not a lot of room for things to get stuck. I'm thinking about most standard kitchen knives where you have a plastic handle. I think for this year and going forward, I will recommend that those can be koshered for Pesach. So that's a more lenient standard. I'll try to update the guide. And finally, plastic and glass. I would recommend you kosher plastic and glass that can be koshered through hagala, through boiling water. But if there's, I think an example of something that I'd be more cautious about is if you happen to have a Pyrex, which does count as glass. If you have a Pyrex pan and you normally cook things in it without any water. So I'm not talking about making some kind of stew in it, making some kind of roast where there is water at the bottom when you're starting. But if you're actually if you're roasting things without any liquid, without adding any liquid to them, then that Pyrex really needs to be koshered with libun gummer, with a high level of koshering, the high level of heat, and not with a liquid medium of hagala. So in those cases, I would recommend against koshering it, just because I don't think that a Pyrex pan can survive 950 degrees inside a self-cleaning oven or a direct source of heat. So I would recommend you kosher glass and plastic that were primarily used for liquids. Okay, that is a very quick intro to koshering. The hour is getting late. I just want to make sure that you've seen, I collected to the best of my abilities what I think is a relatively comprehensive list of foods or grocery items, ingredients that either their regular hechsher all year round is good enough for Pesach without a special Pesach hechsher, or that even without any hechsher, they're fine. I think chia seeds is an example of that, if they have no additives and they're fully raw. You do have to check, like many kinds of grains that are not chametz and not kitniot, you do have to check them before Pesach and make sure that there's nothing else mixed inside of them. Thank you. I do want to point out when it comes to coffee, which is something close to my heart, and I'm sure close to many of yours. I did double check that Pete's decaf is kosher for Passover this year, even if it's not marked as kosher for Pesach. So to those of you who drink coffee and don't need the caffeine hit, there is a solution that still tastes decent. So I would recommend Pete's for that reason. There are a few other things I wanted to point out for this year that I think I didn't have last year. If you need lemon or lime juice, The real lemon juice and real lime juice brands, I think you can get them at Safeway. I didn't check though. They have an OU all year round, and those are acceptable for Pesach. Let's see, other things that I added in this year. The leniency last year around spices, I would recommend being stricter this year, back to kind of our regular standard about spices, which is that if you're buying ground spices, that you buy them with a Pesach kasher. You can find most of them at Oakland Kosher. We tend to buy, a few of them a year and make do with what we have. However, if you'd like to buy whole spices and grind them yourself, maybe buy a special grinder for Pesach. You can buy whole spices without a Pesach kasher. For example, I think I'll probably be buying peppercorns from Trader Joe's that have their own grinder. Those are whole spices, and we'll be using those for Pesach. If you're missing your whiskey, Patron Silver Tequila is acceptable for Pesach, even without a Pesach kasher. If you're going to buy, if you like buying peeled or pre-cut veggies, Rabbi Eidlitz, he okays a bunch of pre-cut veggies, but baby carrots are complicated. They're not just cut carrots. They're processed a little bit more than that. But he checked into the Safeway ones, that those are kosher for Pesach, even without a Pesach kasher. And if you wanted to buy other kinds of peeled or cut up vegetables, I would just recommend buying them before Pesach. There's an extremely low chance that there are any other additives added to them, but in case they came in contact with something that was chametz, while we don't rely on bittul ever on Pesach proper when it comes to chametz, if there was a very low chance from before Pesach and you purchased it before Pesach, the principle is that you can rely on bittul, on annulment, before Pesach actually began. So in those cases, it's best to buy these products like pre-cut veggies. This also applies to eggs in an ideal circumstance, milk as well, without a Pesach kasher, to buy them before Pesach. I did include a number of extra items this year. I tried to come up with like a convenient list. These are items that are kosher for Passover, even if they're not marked as kosher for Passover. At Trader Joe's and at Costco. So I hope that's a helpful list for you. I hope that's a helpful list for you. And that kind of takes me through my kosher ingredient list. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'm seeing a few questions come into the chat. Before I do that, I'd like to just share a few links with you. The first is, you're always welcome to email me or contact me for more specific questions, what our community standards are. But I do want you to have access to the CRC guide for Pesach. That's often a very helpful one. The OU Kosher guide for Pesach. That's often a helpful one. And if you're interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of individual products, the Kosher Quest guide from Rabbi Albert is very helpful as well. I think my little mini guide here covered most of the grounds. No, that's a coffee expression. Covered a lot of the ground, and I'm going to put that in here in the chat as well. That's a link to the document I just sent you. I will try to update it a little bit before Pesach. Okay, that's a lot of words. I've been talking a lot. I see questions coming in the chat, but I'll answer the one that I just saw come in on the chat. And then please feel free after that to unmute yourselves and answer any other questions. So question is, what about Pyrex or glass bowls that are used for non-liquids like salad? Can those be kosher for plastic? So that's great. Something that's used for salads, there was no transference of taste whatsoever because there was never heat introduced into it. Now you might make the argument that for a salad or something that wasn't a kli rishon, that even if there was hot heat, it wasn't a first level vessel of heat. That means it wasn't something that went directly on a stove or into an oven. Even if you were then dealing with non-liquid foods, you don't have to be worried about a transference of taste there. However, many times people will put those Pyrex bowls or glass bowls into their dishwashers, and they'll get washed with chametz in the dishwasher. So in that case, there is a concern about a transference of taste, but the transference of taste happened in a liquid environment, which is the dishwasher. So once it happens in a liquid environment, it can be kosher through hagala, through putting it into the boiling water. So thank you. That was an excellent question. I do have okay, yeah, I'll keep them coming in the chat. Is it okay to use a hot water urn that is used during the rest of the year? Also, what about electric hot plates? Use like a blech. Try to make it. I'm gonna actually throw that into my frequently asked questions that I'm gonna try to start collecting. A shout out to someone who gave me that recommendation instead of trying to answer things from scratch every year. Okay, so hot water urn. If you were careful that the only thing that went into it during the year was water, you should wash off the sides of it carefully, and then you can use it on Pesach. You should clear out the water and preferably wash the inside of it as well, but you can use it for Pesach. Okay, electric hot plates used like a blech. So electric hot plates can be koshered. So what I would recommend is that you clean them really well, wait 24 hours, turn them on to their highest setting for, let's say, an hour or so. That koshers it. After that point, I think it would be best to cover it with aluminum foil throughout Pesach, if possible. If not possible, I'm not sure that that's ma'akev. I don't think it's an absolute requirement. But yeah, you can kosher your electric hot plate, and then I would recommend using it covered if possible. Got a question about dried mushrooms and whether they're okay for Pesach. I assume these are dried mushrooms that don't have a hechsher, which during the year is something we do rely on. I don't know the answer for Pesach, and if it's important, let me try to find an answer. I'm going to put it into my Q&A and try to find an answer. Please feel free to nudge me if you don't hear back from me in a few days. I got a few questions in advance. So let me go through some of those questions that I got in advance. Induction cooktops was a new one for me. These are like the Miele cooktops that have this magnetic system that they transfer heat through electromagnetism. I don't understand the science 100%. It's been a long time since my high school and college science days. But the short version there is you should take one of the pots that is meant to work with these induction cooktops, heat the pot to its highest temperature, and then you've koshered the electric cooktop. I got a question about eating matzah meal or matzah balls leading towards Pesach. There are those who are strict not to eat any kind of matzah products before Pesach. That being said, Rav Shechter this year has recommended using egg matzah for your Shabbat meals on Shabbat Erev Pesach, and that way you can eat a regular lunch at a normal time, and you don't have to finish lunch before the time to stop eating chametz, like at 11, 12 in the morning or so. He also referenced this, and it's in the Mishnah Berurah, that things, even if they're made of matzah meal, like matzah balls, but that aren't actually matzah anymore, you can eat them on Erev Pesach as well. There are people who are more strict, but I think you can rely on that. Okay, now I'm seeing a question that came up earlier and is coming up again. Should one be worried about glass, like a wine glass or drinking glass, shattering when taking out after Hagala? Any best practices for this? So it's never, we have kosher glass in the past. It's never been an issue for us. I'd probably recommend not putting it in cold water immediately, maybe let it cool down a little bit more gradually before putting it in cold water if you want to. I guess if the first one shatters, if you put it in cold water, then don't worry about the minhag of putting stuff in cold water after that. Hopefully you'll be okay and won't have to worry about it. Thanks for that question. I had also gotten questions about, do wine or drinking glasses need kashering for Pesach? So I think the standard is, if you were only using them with wine or water or other things that are not kosher for Passover, but they never came in contact with heat or with strong heat, then technically speaking, they can just be washed off and they don't have to be koshered. If though you wash them in a dishwasher afterwards, where they really came in contact with likely hot chametz, then they should be kosher for Pesach in using Hagala. Okay, the other leniency I wanted to share for this year, hearing our baby is not so happy right now, so try to go quickly. Teflon pans. These are the pans with the coating on them, and they're non-stick. So Teflon is a form of plastic, and I spoke to Rav Simon today, and he suggested that you can kosher Teflon pans. This is assuming that they were used with some kind of liquid medium during the year. Like if you normally fried things with a base of oil, then you can use them. You can kosher it with Hagala with Hagala with the boiling water. And that's a new leniency for this year that I don't think I do plan on it applying in the future. But in the past, I was more strict. I do want to clarify, someone asked, Pyrex is the same as glass, and that is correct. Okay, I got a bunch of questions from last year when we were lenient about things that were open during the year and then using them on Pesach. So as a general, I'm going to do like a very lightning round now of questions I got before. As a general principle, it's best not to use things that were open during the year. That being said, you have to use your own kind of seichel and logic here. If you were absolutely certain that no chametz or could have come in contact with, let's say, a bag of nuts that you happen to take handfuls out of during the year, if you're 100% certain based on the way that you store things, and if you're more cautious or obsessive in your kitchen than I am, then you do not have to, like strictly speaking, you don't have to get a new bag of nuts. But if there's a significant risk that your bag of nuts would have come in contact with flour during the year, which in our pantry is the case, then I would strongly recommend getting a new bag of nuts for Pesach. Okay, I'm going through a lightning round here. Does goat cheese need a Pesach kasher? Yes. Kosher capers need a Pesach kasher? Yes. Dried fruit, oftentimes yes, but Rabbi Albert went through a list of Trader Joe's dried fruits that are kosher for Passover year-round, even without the P for Pesach. I would look at that list again. Okay, spices. So last year we were lenient, basically saying that spices that were already in your year-long spice collection you can use on Pesach. I'm not extending that leniency this year. In principle, I think it's quite likely that if you're using spices during the year, chametz could have come in contact with them. I would recommend buying new spices for Pesach. Cans of tuna, do they need a kosher for Passover this year? Yes. Open bag of unused paper plates. I would say take off the top layer, make sure that the rest of them are clean. And I think you're fine using them. Open container of avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil. I'd say same principle here. I probably for the vast majority of us, we should get new ones. If you were exceedingly careful, in principle, it's possible that you can be lenient. I'm not familiar with people who are quite that careful in general. Same thing for an open bag of quinoa and other kinds of things that are opened and stay in your pantry and come in contact with others, such, with other parts of your kitchen. Okay, I got a question now. Challah on Shabbat morning. In the email that we sent out last Wednesday, we have detailed instructions for how to wash, how to do your Shabbat meals on Shabbat Erev Pesach. I'd say please read that first and then come back to me if you have any follow-up questions. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. How are we feeling? Feeling good? A little bit of sweat on your brow? Okay, it is, we have a general expression, lefum tzara agra, that according to the pain, so too is the reward. I hope that, you have a meaningful experience. Remember that we're doing this for the sake of our relationship with Hashem. It's not just, we are avdei Hashem, we are servants of God, but there is a purpose to that servitude. There's a closeness and an intimacy that comes from that servitude. Hopefully this should not take too long, right? You should be able to do this over a weekend. I'd suggest thinking about, if you have a few hours on the Thursday night before, or the Friday before, like the week before Pesach, maybe cleaning up your kitchen on a Thursday night or Friday, and then trying to leave your appliances unused, leaving your appliances unused over Shabbat, trying not to put hot water in your sink over Shabbat, and then doing your kashering on Motzei Shabbat. That's probably what we're going to do if we get our act together. That's probably the easiest way to do it in my mind. It is doable. We're going to make it happen. And the reward is a really wonderful one. And remember that hopefully we get to the Seder and the evil child at our table, or the evil child instead of us, is not just complaining about all this terrible avoda, but sees that there is a purpose to this beautiful, beautiful set of mitzvot that bring us ultimately closer with Hashem, closer to our Jewish history, and closer to our relationship with Am Yisrael. Okay, I'm going to pause there. It is wonderful seeing some of you, being on the line with the rest of you, and wishing you all a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. If we didn't cover anything tonight, please feel free to send me more emails, and I'll throw my email in the chat right before I close out the room. You should all have it anyways. Okay. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. It is great being here with you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat tov.
Thanks,
Shabbat Tov, Chodesh Tov, of
Thank you.
Kodesh Tov. Thank you.
course. See y'all soon.
Yeah.
Laila Tov. Bye.
Laila Tov.